All three of these lenses are firmly in the budget cine lens category, but there are significant differences in price, feature set, and optical character. And so if you're trying to decide between these three, or if you've got a set of Vespid 1s and you're looking to upgrade, I'm hoping this video is going to help you make that decision. A quick disclosure, I have relationships with both of these companies. They've never paid me, but they have given me gear in the past, but neither company has had any say in the making of this video. First, looking at price, the Vespid 1s are about 35% less than the Vespid 2s, and the Vespid 2s are about $150 less than the Athenas. I have put the best prices I could find on all three lenses, both individuals and as full sets, in the description down below. Prices do change all the time, but for the best current pricing, check the description below. Before we jump into the optical test, we're going to look at the build, the handling, and the feature set of the lenses because I think this is where we're going to see quite a big difference. Once we get into the optical test, in a lot of ways, they can be very similar. So this might be where a lot of the decisions are actually made. To start with, when we look at the size and weight, you just see them on the table here. They are all a very similar size and they're all a very similar weight. The Vespid 1s are probably somewhere between 10 to 15% heavier than the other two. The Athenas and the Vespid 2s are very, very similar. Looking at the dampening of the focus, all three of them are well dampened. They feel very, very similar. Holding them in the hand, I might struggle to tell them apart as far as how well dampened they are. The DZO Vespid 1 has a 270-degree focus throw, and the Athenas and the Vespid 2s have a 300-degree focus throw. Probably the biggest difference you're going to see when handling these lenses is how stiff the iris is. The Vespid 2s and the Vespid 1s have a nice, well-dampened iris, and it feels pretty good and it isn't too hard to turn, but I don't think it's going to get bumped out very easily. The Athenas is extremely stiff, and they were purposely made this way so you wouldn't accidentally change the iris while you're shooting. The iris is so stiff, whether you're doing it by hand or with a focus motor, I think if you do try to change your iris in shot, you are going to end up shaking the lens or shaking the camera. I think you're going to be able to, with the Vespid 2s, do that without any problem. But the benefit to this, if you're somebody who doesn't change the iris in your shot, there's almost no chance you're going to bump it out by accident. Another big difference is the compatibility with drop-in rear filters like this Paco system, and the Vespid 1s and Vespid 2s work no problem, but the Athenas actually stick out too far, and this hits and it won't go all the way in, so I can't lock that in. Now, I haven't checked all the Athenas. Some of them may work, some of them may not, but this is the 35 on the Vespid 2, and you'll see that goes in no problem. The Athenas do have alternative non-PL sets of lenses. They have them in E, RF, and L, and those can be bought with drop-in filter systems. So that is the workaround. For me, I would prefer to be able to use an adapter like this because then I can use the lenses on any of my cameras. But if you're staying with one mount, E, RF, or L, you can actually get the lenses that have the drop-in filter built into them. The other thing you'll notice when you look at these lenses is the Vespid 2s have some contacts on the back here, and they also have this LEMO port here. And you'll notice that the Vespid 1s and the Athenas do not have that. This is for what they're calling iCook technology. This can feed real-time data of your current t-stop and focus distance to the camera or to an external system. It also writes it to the file. So for post-production, it can be used, but it can also be used for follow focus systems. This is something the DZO RLs, which is DZO's top-end lenses, don't even have. So that is an interesting feature. I think for a lot of people, they might not use it, but it might be something that adds to the resale value. Looking at the focal length options, the Vespid 1s have 11 different focal lengths ranging from 12 to 125 millimeter. The Vespid 2s currently have 6 ranging from 18 to 105. That is the newest set. And the Athena has 8 between 14 and 135. I reached out to both NISI and DZO and asked, are you going to release more focal lengths for the Athenas or the Vespid 2s? And they said that they would do so based on market demand. So it didn't sound like they had any specific plans, but they are monitoring the market, and there may be some focal lengths released in the future. The other thing I should note is the Vespid 1s don't really have a bigger brother lens that they can mix well with, where the Vespid 2s and the Athenas both have more premium lenses, and due to a similar construction and coating and optical design, you can mix them very well. So the Vespid 2s can mix with the DZO RLs, which there's 11 focal lengths between 14 and 180. 80, and the NISI Athenas can mix with the Aureus, which there's currently 5 between 18 and 55, but they already have 3 more planned, so that set may get bigger as well. So if there's an eye to the future of getting some of those T1.4 cine lenses as well, I would definitely check out some reviews on those, because that might also help guide your decision. Looking at focus breathing, it was excellent across all 3 sets. I was really surprised by this. For some reason, I thought the Vespid ones would have a little bit more focus breathing, but it was near on perfect. And I think they're all so close to each other. In any real world shot, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between any of them. And even when we were doing very close focus and starting at a close focus, what you'll see is the foreground and background will become more blurry and it will swell, but it remains the same size throughout the whole focus pull. So for all practical consideration, the focus breathing performance across all 3 sets of lenses of the focal lengths I tested was near on perfect. Looking at color match, this is a place that budget cine lenses never really match up to the big high-end brands, and I think that's fine considering the price point, and it's a small price to pay for everything else that you get. But all 3 of these were reasonably good, and looking at the Vespid ones, there was a 400 Kelvin shift between the maximum and minimum lens and a +2 tint. That was the 21mm was the coolest and the 125 was the warmest. Looking at the Vespid 2s, we had a maximum of 300 Kelvin shift and a +2 tint. The 24mm was the warmest and the 105mm was the coolest. And the Athenas, we had a 450 Kelvin maximum shift and a +6 tint, with the 18mm being the warmest and the 50mm being the coolest. Now, all these performances are close enough. In most real-world situations, you will not be able to tell. And even though the Athenas had the biggest shift, we've been using those on a ton of different projects, and I've never found a point where anybody had to change anything in post, even though we had the white balance locked off. When we look at the thing on the vector scope, you will notice that the Vespid 2s do have a tighter grouping overall than the Athenas and the Vespid 1s, but I think in real world results, it's going to be very hard to pick a difference. Looking at distortion, I think across the entire range, the Vespid 2s are marginally better at controlling distortion. Looking at the 18, the 24 and 25, the 35 and 50, it's just a little bit better across the board. All the lenses and all the sets have barrel distortion from 18 to 50mm. The Athenas is just a little bit more pronounced, and the DZO Vespid 2s is just a little bit better controlled. Looking at sharpness, the Vespid 1s are clearly the softest, even at T2.1. You do have to stop them down to get the maximum sharpness. I don't think they're soft by any means, but they're not highly detailed like the other 2. When I look at the Vespid 2s in the Athenas, I think they are very, very similar, and in real world results, I think you would be hard-pressed to tell them apart, particularly at T1.9, where you're more likely to miss focus than nail focus and notice that one lens is sharper than the other. Both the Athenas and the Vespid 2s do get modestly sharper as you stop them down, but at T1.9, both lenses are perfectly sharp and perfectly usable, where I think the Vespid 1s, you probably would have some situations where you would want to stop them down. So you're getting T1.9 on the 2 newer lenses, and you're getting a completely usable T1.9 across the set. I also found that they were all, in practical terms, as sharp as each other across the range of focal lengths. You wouldn't have to worry about one focal length being extra soft and we need to stop that one down, or do we avoid that lens? You'll find that in practical terms, they're all just as good as each other. Looking at vignette, the Vespid 2s might have a little bit more vignette in general across the range. Now, of course, it varies lens to lens. And when we look at the Vespid 2s 18mm at T1.9 and compare that to T2.4 on the Athena's 18mm, we've obviously got more vignette, but stop it down to T2.4 and match them up, and the vignette performance is very similar. But I do find across a range of focal lengths that the Vespid 2s do have a little bit more vignette in general than the Athenas. Looking at the chromatic aberration performance, the Vespid 1s do exhibit a little bit of chromatic aberration now and then, and this isn't just test chart chromatic aberration. It will pop up in real-world images from time to time. I do find that the Athenas and the Vespid 2s are near on perfect, and I really didn't find any situation in high contrast scenes in in-focus areas where I got any purple or color fringing. I found it to be absolutely clinical, so I wouldn't worry about shooting these things wide open and worry about chromatic aberration. It's exceptionally well controlled. One place you will see some amount of difference is in the longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is a change in color cast in the out of focus areas before and after the plane of focus. It will also sometimes show up as outlining on bokeh balls or specular highlights. What I find throughout most of the lenses in the set, between the Athenas and the Vespid 2s, they are very, very similar. But when you look at NISI's 35mm, which is probably the weakest in that longitudinal chromatic aberration performance, on a test chart, I could definitely see that change in color cast as we pulled focus back and forth across the test chart. And we could see that the Vespid 2s did not seem to have that same issue. Now, in my experience on all the real world shoots, I never have had a problem with this or seen this, but if you go looking for it and shoot a test chart, you will find that the Vespid 2 does perform better at a few of the focal lengths. Looking at the flare, the Vespid 1s can have crazy wild flares at times, and probably one of the biggest challenges with the Vespid 1 is that the flare is unreliable. It will show up at times, you don't know where it's coming from or what's going on, and when that happens, it can desaturate or ruin the image, and this has probably been one of the Achilles heels of the Vespid 1s. Now, if you're looking for a cool, crazy flare look, that might be exactly what you want, but it can be a challenge to work with depending on what sort of lights you've got in the scene. Looking at the Vespid 2s, they are exceptionally well controlled. You can still get nice soft flares. So if you want cinematic flares and you want to add to your image by bringing flare on, you can, but I never found a situation where the image lost significant contrast. It holds its contrast really well, and it's also a very reliable flare, so it's not showing up when you don't want it, but you can bring it on when you do. The Athena flare is something different yet. It's quite easy to bring on, and when you bring it on, I think it looks really good. But there are situations where you can get some desaturation and washing out of the image, so it is something you have to watch out for. But I think for somebody who likes flare, that might be a nice middle ground because the NISI flares do look pretty cool. Looking at bokeh and background blur, I thought they were all excellent, and this is a place that I really struggled to separate them. They all have generally round bokeh and specular highlights. As you get to the edge of frame, depending on what focal length you're shooting on, you can get a little bit of cutting or lemon shapes. I don't mind that. That gives you a little bit of a swirly bokeh effect at times. But across all three lens sets, I thought the out of focus areas were smooth and pleasing, never distracting, and they always formed a nice backdrop for whatever is sharpened in the frame. So as far as background blur goes, I think they're all very good. You might look at these images and prefer one over the other, but I think they're all very good. So which one is right for you? Well, the Vespid 1s are a great price, but I do think they are on the verge of being discontinued, so you might not be able to get them in the near future, and you might have to look at the used market. The only other problem I have with the Vespid 1s is, although they are great lenses, when you look at chromatic aberration, sharpness wide open, and sometimes that unintended or unwanted flare, there is the possibility that those lenses will let you down in certain situations. If we look at the NISI Athenas and the DZO Vespid 2s, I think this is really going to come down to personal preference and which one you like the look of better. If you like the stiffer aperture ring, if you want to use one of the drop-in filter adapters, or if you want to go with NISI's drop-in filter lens system. So I think these are going to be personal preference. The DZOs are a little bit cheaper. They do have that iCook technology as well. But honestly, I don't think you can go wrong with either. I have done dedicated videos on all three of these lens sets, and I've just thrown those videos on screen now. I will also have them linked in the description down below. So if you're still not sure, go and watch the dedicated videos.